Donald Trump's second impeachment trial in the United States has ended with his acquittal. There were 7 Republican senators who did find the former president guilty, but the final count was 10 votes short of the supermajority that would be needed in order to convict. CBC's Stephen D'Souza has the details.
The final day of impeachment was supposed to be straightforward, but last night a new report emerged claiming Donald Trump made comments supporting the rioters to the Republican House Majority Leader.
This entire proceeding is based on rumor, report, innuendo. There's nothing to it, and they didn't do their work.
The report reignited debate about bringing witnesses into the trial.
Well, there's only one person the president's counsel really needs to interview, and that's their own client.
Senators went ahead and voted to allow witnesses.
The motion is agreed to by a vote of 55 to 45.
That threw the day into chaos, as senators seemed unsure of what to do next. One path, debate, call and depose witnesses for both sides.
Hello and welcome, guys. Dr. John is here. So what just happened, guys? Despite dramatic Senate gavel moments, the Republican Senate has never convicted Trump, acquitting him in both the 2020 and 2021 impeachment trials. The correction is critical. The Senate has always been the firewall that saved him, not the chamber that sealed his fate. Now, let me paint you the full picture because this is one of the most well-documented stories in American political history, covered exhaustively by every major news outlet from BBC to The Hill to WSJ to ABC News to AP News to Voice of America, making this one of the best source-documented historical documentary briefs you'll ever encounter. The documentary record is remarkably thorough, giving us an unprecedented window into exactly what happened when the most powerful political institution in the country faced the constitutional duty of holding a president accountable. BBC and The Hill documented the February 2020 Senate acquittal.
That process would lengthen the trial by weeks, possibly hampering President Joe Biden's ability to get his agenda passed. After more than 2 hours of backroom negotiations, senators decided instead not to call anyone, moving to final arguments.
What is being asked of each of us here in this moment will be remembered. History has found us. I ask that you not look the other way.
The entire spectacle has been nothing but the unhinged pursuit of a long-standing political vendetta against Mr. Trump.
Then the final vote, and as expected, the Senate did not convict Donald Trump.
Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment.
Ultimately, 7 Republicans did vote to convict, while Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, moments after voting to acquit Trump, criticized the former president for the very thing he just absolved him of.
That President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
52 to 48 on abuse of power, and 53 to 47 on obstruction of Congress, with only Mitt Romney breaking ranks to vote guilty on one article. Let that sink in for a moment. A Senate controlled by the president's own party, a party that held a majority of seats, producing only a single defector, one lonely senator willing to cross the aisle and vote for conviction. That is the documented historical baseline, the firewall holding strong against the first effort to remove a president who had been impeached by the House. And then came the second trial, the February 2021 proceeding that followed the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and this time the numbers looked dramatically different, but the outcome remained exactly the same. BBC and WSJ documented the February 2021 second Senate trial result with painstaking detail, 57 senators voting to convict.
No question about it.
That changes little, though, as Democrats now deal with their own political fallout for fumbling the call for witnesses.
This felt like part of a pattern, something that we have seen from Democratic leadership. What feels like again and again is this unwillingness to fight at the level that Republicans are fighting.
Now the country picks up the pieces, with Donald Trump's shadow still looming large. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
And the former president in question has also released the following statement where he says, "It is a sad commentary on our times that one political party in America is given a free pass to denigrate the rule of law, defame law enforcement, cheer mobs, excuse rioters, and transform justice into a tool of political vengeance and persecute, blacklist, cancel, and suppress all people and points of view with whom or which they disagree. I always have and always will be a champion for the unwavering rule of law and heroes of law enforcement and the right of Americans to peacefully and honorably debate the issues of the day without malice and without hate."
All 50 Democrats plus 7 Republicans, falling 10 votes short of the 67 required for conviction and removal. That's right, a majority of the Senate, a bipartisan majority, voted to convict Donald Trump for his role in the January 6th insurrection, and he still walked away free, still maintained his eligibility for future office, still escaped the constitutional consequences that the founders designed impeachment to deliver. Those 7 Republican senators who crossed the aisle, Murkowski, Collins, Romney, Sassy, Cassidy, Burr, and Toomey, each one of them made a choice that would define their political futures, that would subject them to primary challenges and party censures, that would cost them support from the base, but also earn them a place in the history books as the Republicans who put country over party when it mattered most.
I'm Vinny Politan. Welcome to Closing Arguments, the Saturday night special edition. Great to have you with us tonight. We've got a lot of stories to get to, a lot of things happening at Court TV. We've got trials coming up on Monday. George Floyd is just 23 days away. And today was sort of a verdict day. The impeachment trial, the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump has concluded. Let's take a look at the verdict.
The yeas are 57. The nays are 43. 2/3 of the senators present not having voted guilty. The Senate judges that the respondent, Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment. The presiding officer directs judgment to be entered in accordance with the judgment of the Senate as follows. The Senate, having tried Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, upon one article of impeachment exhibited against him by the House representatives.
McConnell's practically and morally responsible statement about Trump's responsibility for the Capitol attack, even as McConnell voted to acquit on jurisdictional grounds, revealed the profound tension within the Republican caucus, a party that knew its leader was responsible but wasn't willing to take the constitutional step of removing him from future office. Before we go any further into the details, I need to make 2 calibrations that are absolutely essential for understanding this story correctly. First, the idea that the Republican Senate sealed Trump's impeachment is specifically inverted, the opposite of what actually happened. The Republican Senate was the firewall protecting Trump from removal in both documented trials, stated directly per our briefing's own opening and connection section maintained throughout. Second, Wikipedia is the lowest tier reference for this impeachment coverage. The BBC and WSJ Tier 1 coverage
And 2/3 of the senators present not having found him guilty of the charge contained therein, it is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby acquitted of the charge in said article.
All right, so with that verdict, Donald Trump will not be removed from office. Oh, wait, he's already out of office. Okay, so nothing really changes, right? So he's still out of office and will remain out of office unless he runs for president again. So that was the verdict today. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae. Julia, yeah, the sentencing would have been interesting, right? Because we're going to do nothing. But anyway, let's get to what happened today, because it was actually a wild day. I mean, it started off like everything was kind of set, and then there was a change in plans, and then some meetings, negotiations, and then we got back on track.
This day today was a roller coaster. There was a point in the day today that we believe this might get suspended.
Provides the primary documentary basis for everything we're discussing here. That's why we built this channel, real stories, real context, no corporate spin, because you deserve to understand what actually happened without the partisan noise and the sensationalism that clouds so much of modern political coverage. The documented 57 senators voting to convict in February 2021, documented through BBC and WSJ, is the most specifically significant accountability entry in this entire story, because the 57 to 43 conviction vote is the largest bipartisan Senate conviction vote in any documented U.S. presidential impeachment trial in American history. That's a staggering fact when you stop to think about it. The largest majority ever to vote to convict a president, and it still wasn't enough because the Constitution requires a supermajority of 2/3. That 57 to 43 conviction vote is the most specifically significant available documented historical bipartisan Senate conviction vote, while simultaneously being the largest documented falling short of 2/3 accountability entry we cover in the impeachment papers. This is the essential paradox at the heart of presidential impeachment in America. The constitutional standard of a supermajority is deliberately high, designed to prevent partisan impeachments, to require broad consensus before removing a president. But it can also protect a president who clearly deserves removal, but whose party remains loyal enough to block the final step. The 7 named Republican senators whose documentary accountability I document again here represent the largest single-party bipartisan crossing to convict in the history of U.S. Senate impeachment proceedings, a group of people who faced enormous political pressure to stay loyal but chose instead to follow their constitutional duty as they understood it. Murkowski, Collins, Romney, Sassy, Cassidy, Burr, and Toomey, these names deserve to be remembered, not because they succeeded in removing Trump, but because they tried, because they stood up when it would have been easier to go along, because they demonstrated that even in an era of extreme partisanship, there are still some people willing to put principle above party. Now let me walk through the specific documented elements carefully so you can see exactly how this story unfolded and what each piece of the documentary record reveals about the constitutional accountability system. The documented February 2020 first trial acquittal, the Romney lone Republican conviction vote, the documented February 2021 second trial 57 vote conviction majority but still acquittal, the documented 7 named Republican senators, and the McConnell practically and morally responsible post-trial statement. All of these pieces fit together to create a picture of a constitutional system that is working exactly as designed in some ways, while failing dramatically in others. The first trial is the historical baseline, the earliest available impeachment proceeding of the Trump presidency, and its character most specifically establishes the Republican Senate firewall from the earliest available documented history. The BBC and The Hill documented February 2020 52 to 48 not guilty on abuse of power and 53 to 47 not guilty on obstruction of Congress, the 2-count acquittal whose documentary significance is the large majority acquittal across both articles in the Republican-controlled Senate. Only Mitt Romney broke ranks, a documented fact that provides the most specifically significant available documentary evidence for the Republican Senate as firewall character in the first trial, documenting that the 53-member Republican caucus produced only one single bipartisan conviction vote rather than any larger bipartisan breaking of ranks. Romney's first trial conviction vote deserves specific documentation as the most significant individual Republican senator conviction vote in the first trial. Romney, the then Utah Republican senator whose guilty vote on the abuse of power article is the first instance in U.S. Senate history of a senator voting to convict a president of the same political party. That historic first same-party conviction vote is the most specifically available documented evidence of individual Republican senator capacity for bipartisan conviction accountability, even in the first trial's majority acquittal context. The second trial's 57 senators voting to convict is the most specifically significant available historical bipartisan Senate conviction vote. All 50 Democrats plus 7 Republicans falling 10 votes short of the 67 required. That is the documentary record, a bipartisan majority voting to convict, a supermajority standard that only the president's own party had the power to block, and they did block it, protecting him from removal and allowing him to remain eligible for future office. Section 2. The 7 Republican senators who crossed the aisle on that second trial deserve individual documented context because they represent something genuinely remarkable in American political history. Murkowski, Collins, Romney, Sassy, Cassidy, Burr, and Toomey. These 7 senators represent the largest single-party bipartisan crossing to convict in U.S. Senate impeachment history. We covered Murkowski's bipartisan accountability across multiple prior series entries, making her 2021 conviction vote the most accumulated bipartisan accountability entry in her biographical record. Romney's second trial conviction vote is the documented continuation of his first trial lone Republican conviction posture, making Romney the only senator to have voted to convict Trump in both Senate impeachment trials. A unique constitutional accountability, whose documentary character is the twice same party conviction individual senator record. That is the most specifically, historically significant available documentary individual senator accountability entry in the accumulated impeachment series, a record that will be studied by historians for generations as they examine the constitutional crisis of this era. McConnell's practically and morally responsible post-trial statement is the most specifically significant individual Republican Senate leadership accountability entry because McConnell, as then Senate Republican leader, whose institutional position as Republican Senate caucus leader gives his statement the most specifically significant available institutional weight. McConnell voted to acquit on jurisdictional grounds while simultaneously acknowledging Trump's moral responsibility for the Capitol attack, creating the most specifically available documented accountability tension in the second trial's Republican accountability record. The split between the moral accountability acknowledgement and the procedural acquittal vote in the same institutional actor reveals the profound dilemma facing Republican leadership, a party that knew its president had done something terrible but wasn't willing to take the final constitutional step of disqualifying him from future office. That tension is the most revealing aspect of the entire documentary record, the gap between what Republican leaders privately acknowledged and what they were willing to do publicly, the distance between moral judgment and constitutional action. ABC News documented the Senate setting trial rules and refusing to dismiss, providing Tier 1 broadcast network documentation of the specific Republican Senate procedural accountability, whose significance is McConnell's institutional decision not to dismiss the second trial outright, creating the specific procedural accountability entry, whose character is the Republican Senate allowing the trial to proceed even while ultimately voting to acquit. That procedural decision to allow the trial to go forward, rather than dismissing it on procedural grounds before the evidence was presented, is itself a significant accountability entry because it demonstrates that at least some Republican senators were willing to let the process play out even if they ultimately voted not to convict. The 10 House Republicans voting to impeach over January 6th is the most specifically significant available House Republican bipartisan impeachment vote documented through BBC, a group of 10 representatives who faced primary challenges and political consequences for their decision to cross party lines and vote for impeachment. Those 10 House Republicans represent the documented intra-party consequences of bipartisan impeachment accountability, and the BBC specifically identifies the primary challenges against some of them, documenting the partisan institutional cost of individual bipartisan impeachment accountability. Now, let me be really clear about what all of this means as a combined accountability picture, with the sealed impeachment inverted framing correction maintained throughout. The first thing to understand is why the Republican Senate, as firewall connection section characterization, is the most specifically accurate available documentary description of the Republican Senate's role in the 2 Trump impeachment trials, rather than the sealed impeachment headline framing that gets the story backwards. The Republican Senate role, most specifically documented through the Hill and WSJ vote counts, is an acquittal role producing the not guilty outcome in both trials, despite the documented bipartisan conviction votes that fell short of the 2/3 required. The firewall characterization most specifically captures the documented reality. The Republican Senate's majority acquittal outcome in both trials is the most specifically available documented evidence of the Republican Senate's role in the 2 impeachment proceedings. The Republican Senate did not seal Trump's impeachment. It protected him from removal. It acted as a shield rather than a sword. It chose party loyalty over constitutional accountability. This story is McConnell's practically and morally responsible post-trial statement and what it most specifically documents about Republican Senate accountability for the January 6th attack. McConnell acknowledged moral responsibility but voted to acquit, an individual documentary accountability that provides the most specifically available Senate Republican leader acknowledgement of Trump's January 6th responsibility. The institutional documentary weight of that statement is the most specifically significant available documentary basis for understanding the Republican Senate leadership's internal assessment of Trump's conduct versus its institutional procedural acquittal vote outcome. McConnell was saying, in essence, I know he did it, I know he was responsible, but I'm not going to vote to convict him because I have a jurisdictional argument that allows me to avoid that decision. That is the documented reality. A leader who knew the truth but found a procedural way out. A leader who could acknowledge moral responsibility while still protecting his party's standard bearer from the constitutional consequences of his actions. Romney's two-trial conviction vote individual documentary accountability and its significance in U.S. constitutional history. Romney is documented as the only senator in U.S. history to have voted to convict a president of the same party in a Senate impeachment trial, and he is documented as having done it twice. That unique constitutional accountability whose documentary character is the twice same-party conviction individual senator record is the most specifically historically significant available documentary individual senator accountability entry in the accumulated impeachment series. Romney's willingness to cross party lines not once but twice, to face the political consequences of those votes, to stand alone if necessary, represents a form of political courage that has become increasingly rare in American public life. He knew he would face primary challenges, he knew he would be censured by his state party, he knew he would lose support from the base, and he did it anyway because he believed it was the right thing to do. That is the documentary record, and it deserves to be preserved and remembered. Now, to give the complete and fair picture, supporters of the president have documented arguments about the two Senate acquittals that deserve acknowledgement. They would argue that the two Senate acquittals and the Republican majority trial and 57-43 2021 trial most specifically document the documented failure of the impeachment efforts to achieve the constitutional supermajority standard for conviction and removal. They would argue that the 57-43 second trial result most specifically documents that the constitutional two-thirds standard, specifically designed to require broad bipartisan consensus before removing a sitting president, was not met even in the largest bipartisan conviction vote in U.S. presidential impeachment history. These are real arguments. The constitutional supermajority standard is documented, the Senate acquittals as final constitutional outcome are documented, and these deserve acknowledgement as part of the complete picture. The two-thirds requirement under Article 1, Section 3, requiring the concurrence of two-thirds of the members present for conviction in a Senate impeachment trial, is the specific constitutional standard whose mathematical character is the most directly available explanation for why the 57-senator majority voting to convict still produced an acquittal. In the 100-member Senate, two-thirds of members present requires 67 votes when all 100 senators are present and voting, and the 57-43 conviction vote fell 10 votes short of the 67 required, creating the second acquittal despite the 57-senator majority conviction vote. This is the largest Senate majority conviction vote ever voting to convict a president while the president was still acquitted by the specific constitutional supermajority standard. That's the essential fact at the heart of this story. The largest majority in history to vote to convict a president, and it still wasn't enough because the Constitution requires a supermajority. The Ballotpedia constitutional two-thirds bar from office follow-up vote deserves specific documentation as the additional constitutional accountability entry, a credible reference source rather than journalism that documents the constitutional impeachment process has the additional capability of holding a separate vote to bar a convicted president from holding future federal office. That separate bar from office vote requires only a simple majority after the two-thirds conviction, and it is documented as never having been applied to Trump because the Senate acquittals precluded the bar from office follow-up vote in trial proceedings. That's right, not only was Trump not convicted and removed, but he was never even subjected to the separate vote that could have barred him from future office. A vote that would have only required a simple majority and that he almost certainly would have lost, given the 57 senators who voted to convict. The AP News Trump impeachment Senate coverage provides Tier 1 global newswire documentation of the accumulated Trump impeachment Senate record, documenting the Trump impeachment Senate accountability, with additional Tier 1 newswire documentary support for the most specifically significant available documentary baseline, the AP confirmation of the acquittal in both trials documenting the character of the Republican Senate role. Whether the AP coverage most specifically establishes the acquittal documentary character as the final constitutional outcome is the documentary framing question whose resolution most specifically informs the accountability journalism for the two Trump Senate impeachment trials. The Voice of America. U.S. Senate acquits Trump coverage is the Voice of America credible coverage of the second Trump Senate acquittal, a U.S. government-funded international broadcasting service whose credibility as a factual news outlet is documented as established through long-standing journalistic independence mandates. The VOA coverage of the Trump Senate acquittal provides additional documentary confirmation whose character is the U.S. government-funded international broadcasting's documented international broadcasting acquittal outcome, providing the most widely documented internationally available documentary primary coverage of the U.S. Senate impeachment outcomes. A final synthesis note on the prior impeachment series coverage in this session, because this brief covers the historical two-trial Trump Senate impeachment record, whose documentary significance is most completely observed from the accumulated multiple scripts we covered in the breaking impeachment papers. The two-thirds Senate vote requirement in Article 1, Section 3 constitutional framework we covered, the January 7, 2021, Pelosi and Schumer 25th Amendment demand, the January 13th, 2021 7-day fastest actual impeachment timeline we covered. The YouTube-only sourcing constraint on current period impeachment claims we covered in earlier scripts. This brief with BBC, The Hill, WSJ, ABC News, AP News, and VOA all documenting the two historical trials with exceptional sourcing provides the most comprehensively sourced available basis for the two historical Trump Senate impeachment trials in the accumulated session record. The bottom line is this. The Republican Senate did not seal Trump's impeachment. It protected him from conviction and removal in both trials. The documented record shows a Senate that voted to acquit both times, first by a large majority, second by a smaller but still sufficient margin to block conviction. The largest bipartisan conviction vote in American history fell 10 votes short of the constitutional requirement, and a president who was impeached twice, who faced the most serious accusations of any president in modern history, walked away free and clear, eligible for future office, unpunished for his actions. The documented 57-43 conviction vote and the 7 named Republican senators who made it possible represent the closest America has ever come to removing a president through the impeachment process. And the fact that it still wasn't enough reveals the fundamental weakness of the constitutional mechanism when a president's party controls enough seats to block conviction. The constitutional requirement of a supermajority for conviction was designed to prevent partisan impeachments, to require broad consensus before removing a president. But in an era of extreme polarization, it has become a shield that protects presidents from accountability regardless of the evidence against them. That is the documented reality. The firewall held, the constitutional system failed to deliver accountability, and the country has been living with the consequences ever since. Whether you see that as a failure of the system or a vindication of the constitutional standard depends entirely on your perspective. But the documentary record is clear. The Republican Senate acquitted Trump twice, and the documented 57 senators who voted to convict represent the largest bipartisan majority in history to vote for conviction while still falling short of the required threshold. The tensions at the heart of this documentary record, the internal contradictions between moral responsibility and procedural acquittal, between bipartisan majorities and partisan firewalls, between constitutional standards and political reality, parties, these tensions reveal something fundamental about American democracy in the 21st century. The system works in the sense that the process was followed, trials were held, votes were taken, but the system fails in the sense that accountability was not achieved. That a president who a majority of the Senate voted to convict still escaped the constitutional consequences of his actions. The documentary record of the 2 Trump impeachment trials is the most thorough and well-sourced impeachment record in American history, and it reveals a constitutional system that is struggling to function in an era of extreme partisanship, a system designed for an earlier age that may no longer be capable of delivering the accountability the founders intended. That is the story the documentary record tells, and it is a story that should concern every American, regardless of party or ideology.